My life had become a series of quiet, repeating loops. Wake, work, eat, sleep. The scenery changed, the tasks varied, but the feeling remained the same, a low-grade hum of invisibility. I was a ghost at my own desk, a polite shadow in the grocery store aisle. To combat this spectral existence, I had done the most cliché thing a man on the precipice of 30 could do. I joined a gym. Not a trendy, boutique fitness studio with smoothies and mantras stenciled on the walls, but a real gym. A place that smelled of iron, chalk, and the faint, metallic tang of effort. It was called Iron and Anchor, a name that promised stability I didn't feel. For 3 months, I had been a faithful, if unnoticed, parishioner. I came, I lifted things with mediocre form, and I left, feeling just as invisible as before, only now with sore muscles. The loops continued, just with an added hour of clanking metal. The gym was a world of its own, populated by archetypes. There were the titans who communicated in grunts and dropped weights with earth-shaking finality. There were the cardio bunnies, a flock of women in neon who migrated from elliptical to treadmill with unwavering cheerfulness. And then there were the trainers. They moved through the space with an easy ownership, their brightly colored staff shirts a clear demarcation between them and the rest of us fumbling mortals. I learned their names from a distance: Chloe, Marcus, and him, Julian. Julian was the head trainer. He didn't have the boisterous, drill sergeant energy of the others. He was quieter, a steady, gravitational force in the center of the gym's chaotic orbit. He moved with a deliberate economy, every step purposeful. He had dark, thick hair that was always slightly messy, as if he'd just run his hands through it, and eyes the color of dark coffee that seemed to see everything without ever staring. He corrected form with a low voice and a light touch, his presence calming rather than intimidating. I watched him more than I should have. I watched the way the muscles in his forearms flexed when he re-racked a client's weights, the easy smile he gave an elderly woman on the leg press machine, the focused line of his jaw when he was charting a workout. He was solid. He was present. He was everything I wasn't. My own routine was a pathetic attempt to blend in. I stuck to the machines in the corner, the ones with diagrams that explained their use in 3 simple, illustrated steps. It was safe. It was anonymous. But that day, a surge of misguided ambition led me to the squat rack. I'd seen Julian there with clients, his voice a low anchor as he guided them through the motion. Hips back, chest up, drive through the heels. I could hear his instructions in my head as I loaded a pathetic amount of weight onto the bar. It felt heavier than it looked. I positioned myself under the knurled steel, the cold bite of it a shock against my neck. I lifted it from the hooks, took 2 clumsy steps back, and tried to remember the phantom echo of his voice. Hips back. I lowered myself, my knees trembling. The descent was shaky, uncertain. I went too low, lost the tension in my core, and felt a sudden, sharp pinch in my lower back. A jolt of panic, hot and electric, shot through me. The weight felt like a car pressing down on me. I was stuck, mortified. I tried to push back up, but my legs were jelly. The bar tilted precariously. Easy there. The voice was low, calm, and directly beside my ear. It was his, Julian. A warm, strong hand landed on my lower back, right over the point of the stinging pain, while another hand expertly guided the bar back into the safety catches of the rack with a solid, definitive clang. You're all right. Step out. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of embarrassment and something else I couldn't name. I stumbled forward, away from the rack, my face burning. Thanks, I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. I think I went too heavy. Or just too fast, he said, his voice devoid of judgment. He leaned against the rack, crossing his arms over his chest. The movement was casual, but his focus was entirely on me. His staff shirt stretched across his shoulders. He smelled clean, like laundry soap and a faint, woodsy scent that might have been cedar. You're Leo, right? I've seen you in here the last few months. He knew my name. Or at least, he'd noticed my existence enough to identify me. The thought sent a ridiculous, warm thrill through me. I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Let's see that back, he said, his tone shifting from casual observer to professional. It was a command, softened by the quiet authority in his voice. He gestured for me to turn around. I did, feeling like a clumsy child. His fingers, warm and calloused, pressed gently against the muscle on either side of my spine. The touch was clinical, yet it sent a shiver down my entire body. It was the first time someone had touched me with purpose in months. "Doesn't feel like a serious strain," he concluded, his hand dropping away. I almost mourned the loss of the contact. "You just tweaked it. You're holding all your tension up here." He tapped my shoulders. "And not enough here." His hand rested for a fraction of a second on my abdomen. "Let's get you on a mat. I'll show you a couple of stretches." That was the beginning. The catalyst. The moment the loop of my life broke, and a new, terrifying, and exhilarating pattern began to form. He didn't have to help me. He could have let me flounder, or just sent another trainer over. But he didn't. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. And it was Julian who saw me. After that day, my gym routine changed. I was no longer a ghost haunting the corner machines. I was a man with a purpose, to exist in the same space as Julian. It was pathetic, I knew, but it was also the most potent motivation I'd had in years. I started timing my workouts to coincide with his shifts, finding a treadmill with a clear line of sight to the free weights area where he spent most of his time. I became a student of Julian. I learned the rhythm of his day. He started his mornings with his own workout, a quiet, intense affair before the gym officially opened to the masses. I saw him once, arriving early, and watched from my car as he moved through a series of heavy lifts with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He wasn't bulky in a bodybuilder way. He was functionally strong, built like someone who could chop wood or carry a person out of a burning building. His focus was absolute. There was no preening in the mirror, no performative grunting. Just him and the iron, a silent conversation of effort and resistance. During his shifts, I observed his interactions. He had a different mode for every client. With Mrs. Gable, an octogenarian with a fierce perm, he was endlessly patient and encouraging, his voice gentle as he helped her with her physical therapy exercises. With a group of college athletes, he was a firm but fair commander, pushing them with sharp, concise instructions and a rare, challenging grin that made them work harder. He treated everyone with the same baseline of respect, his attention undivided when he was with them. He remembered things, a client's daughter's soccer game, another's upcoming vacation. He wasn't just training their bodies, he was tending to them as people. My analysis of him became an obsession. I'd replay our brief interactions in my head, dissecting them for hidden meaning. When he walked past me and said, "Good set, Leo," was his voice warmer than when he said it to someone else? When his eyes met mine across the gym floor, did the glance linger for a millisecond longer than politeness required? I was searching for clues, for any sign that the quiet current I felt flowing between us was not just a product of my own lonely imagination. The touches began to escalate, always under the guise of professional correction. I'd be on the cable machine, and he'd appear at my side, as if from nowhere. "Keep your shoulders down and back," he'd say, and his hands would settle on my shoulder blades, gently guiding them into place. The warmth of his palms would seep through my shirt, a localized heat that spread through my entire chest. My breath would catch, and I'd have to focus on the cold metal of the handle in my hand to keep from completely losing my composure. Another time, I was attempting dumbbell rows, my form sloppy from fatigue. He stopped me mid-rep. "You're pulling with your arm, not your back," he explained. He stood behind me, one hand on my waist to steady me, the other tracing the path the muscle should follow. "Feel that? Right there. That's what you want to engage." His fingers sketched a line from my shoulder blade down my side, and my skin prickled with goosebumps. His proximity was overwhelming. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that clean, cedar scent again. I was acutely aware of the sound of his breathing, steady and even, so close to my ear. I was so focused on the sensation of his touch that I barely registered his words. I just nodded, my mind a blank slate of pure sensory input. These moments were fleeting, lasting no more than a few seconds, but they sustained me. They were small points of light in the gray landscape of my days. I started to crave them, arranging myself on machines I knew I had trouble with, hoping to attract his attention, his guidance, his touch. It was a calculated sort of helplessness, and I felt a little ashamed of it. But the shame was always overshadowed by the electric thrill of his hand on the small of my back, his voice in my ear. One evening, the gym was particularly crowded. I was waiting for a bench to open up, feeling adrift in the sea of sweating bodies. Julian was with a client, but he caught my eye and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a simple acknowledgement, a silent, "I see you," but to me, it felt like a secret, a private exchange in a public space. My heart did a stupid little flip. I spent the rest of my workout replaying that nod, analyzing the slight tilt of his head, the way his lips had barely curved. Was it just a friendly gesture? Or was it something more? I was a man starving, and Julian was offering me crumbs. I devoured them. The internal monologue never stopped. He's just being a good trainer. That's his job. He's friendly to everyone. My rational brain would supply these logical explanations. But then my hopeful, yearning heart would counter. But he doesn't stand that close to everyone. He doesn't let his hand linger on Mr. Henderson's shoulder. He looked at you today. He really looked at you. It was a constant, exhausting tug-of-war between my cynical reality and my burgeoning fantasy. I was living more in my head, in the space of these imagined possibilities, than I was in the real world. The gym was no longer just a place to work out. It had become a theater, and every night I went to watch a one-act play starring Julian, hoping I might be written into a scene. After 2 weeks of this silent, observational dance, he approached me while I was stretching on a mat in the corner. My heart leaped into my throat. "Leo," he said, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He was holding a clipboard. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I managed, trying to sound casual, as if my entire nervous system wasn't currently on high alert. He sat down on the mat a few feet away, not looming over me. It was a gesture of equality that I appreciated. "I've been watching your progress," he began, and I had to suppress a nervous laugh. "Oh, I've been watching you too. You're consistent, which is half the battle. But your form on the big lifts is holding you back, and I'm worried you're going to hurt yourself again." He looked directly at me, and his gaze was serious, concerned. It felt incredibly intimate. "I have an opening in my schedule," he said, tapping the clipboard with a pen. "A client moved, so my Tuesday and Thursday evenings just cleared up. I think we could make some real progress if we work together." Officially, my mind went blank. Him, me, officially, twice a week. It was more than I had ever allowed myself to hope for. It was terrifying. It meant no more hiding on the periphery, no more safe, anonymous observation. It meant being the sole focus of his attention for an entire hour. It meant I would have to speak, to interact, to not be a ghost. "I don't know," I stammered, the words coming out before I could stop them. Fear was my default setting. "I'm not sure I can afford a personal trainer." It was a lie. I could afford it. I was just afraid of what it meant. Julian didn't miss a beat. "We can work something out. The gym has a few different package options, and the first session is always a free consultation, no strings attached. Just come on Tuesday. We'll talk, figure out some goals, and see how it feels. If it's not for you, no pressure." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "What do you say?" My fear was a loud, insistent clamor in my head. "Say no. Go back to your corner. It's safer there." But the desire, the deep, aching yearning to be near him, to have a legitimate reason to be in his orbit, was stronger. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was the only thing that made me feel alive. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a thin thread of sound. "Okay, Tuesday." His smile widened. "Great. See you then, Leo." He stood up in one fluid motion and walked away, leaving me on the mat with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The loop was well and truly broken. I had a session with Julian, and I was absolutely, unequivocally terrified. The 2 days leading up to our first session were a special kind of torment. I oscillated wildly between giddy anticipation and soul-crushing dread. I changed my workout clothes 3 times on Tuesday morning before leaving for work, settling on a plain gray shirt and black shorts that I hoped were nondescript enough to be invisible, yet clean enough to pass inspection. The irony was not lost on me. I spent the entire day at my desk in a fog, rereading the same email a dozen times without absorbing a single word. My stomach was a knot of anxiety. What would we talk about for an hour? What if I couldn't lift what he told me to? What if he realized I was a complete fraud, a lonely man hiding in a gym, and not a serious client at all? When I walked into Iron and Anchor that evening, the familiar smell of rubber and disinfectant did nothing to calm my nerves. Julian was finishing up with another client, laughing at something she said. He looked relaxed, confident. He saw me, and his smile didn't falter. He gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement that our appointment was still on. I gave a weak wave in return and went to warm up on the bike, my legs feeling like lead. He met me by the water fountain a few minutes later, clipboard in hand. "Ready to do this?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, aiming for nonchalant and landing somewhere near constipated with fear. He led me to a quiet corner of the gym with a set of mats and some resistance bands. "So, first things first," he said, sitting cross-legged and gesturing for me to do the same. "Forget the weights for a minute. Tell me why you're here. What do you want to achieve?" The question was simple, but it felt impossibly complex. "I'm here because I'm lonely, and you're the first person who's made me feel real in years." I couldn't exactly say that. I fell back on the generic answers I'd rehearsed in my head. "I want to get stronger," I said. "And, healthier. Feel better." Julian listened, his dark eyes fixed on me. He wasn't just hearing the words. He seemed to be looking for what was underneath them. "Okay, stronger is good, but it's vague. Stronger for what? Is there something you want to be able to do that you can't do now?" I was thrown. I hadn't thought about it in practical terms. I thought about my life, my apartment filled with furniture I'd paid someone to assemble, the groceries I carried in 2 trips because one was too heavy. The feeling of being insubstantial, easily knocked over by a strong gust of wind. I want to feel more solid," I said, the word coming out before I could censor it. "Less like I'm floating." It was too honest, too vulnerable. I braced myself for a confused look or a polite, professional pivot back to sets and reps. But Julian just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He didn't laugh. He didn't look away. "Solid," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "I get that. We can work with solid." He scribbled a note on his clipboard. That small moment of acceptance, of him taking my weird, abstract feeling and treating it as a legitimate goal, was a revelation. It was as if he'd reached into my chest and gently untangled one of the knots. The rest of the session was focused on assessments. He had me do bodyweight squats, push-ups on my knees, planks. He watched my every move, his focus absolute. His corrections were constant, a stream of quiet instructions. "Tuck your pelvis under, engage your lats, breathe," and with every instruction came a touch. A hand on my hip to correct its alignment. Fingers pressing between my shoulder blades to remind me to pull them together. His knee gently nudging my own into the correct position during a lunge. Each touch was a small explosion on my skin. I was hyper-aware of him, of the space between us, of the way the air shifted when he moved closer. He was all business, his expression focused, but the professional context couldn't negate the effect he had on me. My body, which had for so long felt like a disconnected vessel I was forced to pilot, suddenly felt alive, every nerve ending humming with a new and terrifying awareness. At the end of the hour, he had me lie on my back on the mat for a final stretch. He knelt beside me and gently took my right leg, lifting it and pressing it towards my chest to stretch my hamstring. He held it there, his grip firm and warm around my ankle and behind my knee. I was staring straight up at the industrial ceiling, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, trying desperately to regulate my breathing. "You hold a lot of tension everywhere, Leo," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "In your shoulders, your hips, your back. It's like you're always braced for something." His observation was so accurate it felt like he had read my mind. I was always braced. Braced for disappointment, for loneliness, for another day of feeling invisible. "I guess I am," I whispered, the admission costing me more than any of the physical exertion had. He didn't respond immediately. He just held the stretch, the silence stretching between us, filled only by the distant clank of weights and the low thrum of the gym's music. Then he gently lowered my leg. "Well," he said, looking down at me, and for a second, his professional mask seemed to slip. There was something else in his eyes, something softer, more personal. "That's what we're here for, to learn how to let some of that go." He stood up, offered me a hand, and pulled me to my feet. His grip was strong, and he held on for a second longer than necessary before letting go. "Same time Thursday?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. Thursday. I walked to the locker room in a daze. The session had been physically demanding, but emotionally raw. He had seen past the clumsy guy at the squat rack. He had seen the tension, the bracing. He had seen the desire to be solid, and instead of turning away, he had offered to help. For the first time, the loop wasn't just broken. It felt like I might be starting to build something new in its place. Our sessions became the anchor points of my week. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Everything else was just the space in between. The gym transformed from a stage for my silent observations into a workshop. Our workshop. Julian was a patient and methodical teacher. He stripped everything back to the basics, forcing me to unlearn years of bad habits. We spent weeks with nothing but a PVC pipe, drilling the fundamental movements of squats and deadlifts until the patterns were ingrained in my muscle memory. He was relentless about form, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Drop your hips another inch," he'd command from across the room. "Don't let that knee cave in. Chest up, Leo, chest up." His constant attention should have made me more nervous, but strangely, it had the opposite effect. Under his focused gaze, I had no room for my usual anxious internal chatter. All I could think about was the movement, his voice, and the next instruction. He was teaching me how to be present in my own body. He was teaching me how to be solid. The physical contact became a regular part of our routine, a language of its own. It was always professional, always in the service of correcting my form, but the intimacy of it was undeniable. He would place his thumb on my sternum. Lift this to the ceiling. He would trace the muscles of my back with his fingertips. Squeeze these together. He would stand so close behind me during a squat that I could feel the heat of his chest against my back, his hands on my hips, guiding them through the proper plane of motion. "Right there," he'd murmur, his voice a low vibration against my skin. "That's the position." My body learned to anticipate his touch, to crave it. My skin would prickle in the spot he was about to correct even before his hand landed. I lived for those small moments of connection, for the brief, grounding pressure of his hand. It was a strange, paradoxical state of being. I was more physically exposed and vulnerable with him than I had been with anyone, yet I had never felt safer. One Thursday, about a month into our training, he seemed different, quieter. There was a faint line of worry etched between his brows that I hadn't seen before. He was still a good trainer, his instructions as precise as ever, but the easygoing energy that usually surrounded him was muted. We were working on overhead presses, an exercise I hated. My shoulders were weak, and I struggled to maintain stability. "You're shrugging," he said, his voice flat. "Use your core. Don't push with your traps." I failed the next rep, the bar wavering dangerously over my head before I brought it back down. I felt a surge of frustration. "I'm trying," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. Julian didn't react to my tone. He just took the bar from me and set it on the rack. "Let's take a break. Cool down." He led me to the stretching area, and we sat on the mats in silence for a long moment. The silence felt heavy, different from our usual comfortable quiet. I felt guilty for my outburst. "Sorry," I said, looking at my hands. "I'm just frustrated with this lift." "It's not the lift," he said, and when I looked up, he was watching me with that same thoughtful expression from our first session. "It's a tough day." He wasn't talking about my workout. He was talking about his. It was a small opening, a crack in his professional armor. For once, he was the one showing vulnerability. My own anxieties receded, replaced by a wave of concern for him. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice soft. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture weary. He looked out over the bustling gym floor, but didn't seem to be seeing it. "Yeah. No. It's just stuff. My sister's having a hard time. Family things." He looked back at me, as if suddenly remembering I was a client. "Sorry. Shouldn't be bringing my personal life in here." "Don't be sorry," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "You're allowed to have a tough day." I paused, then added, "You told me we're here to learn how to let things go. Maybe that applies to you, too." I was just echoing his own words back at him, but they seemed to land with surprising weight. A flicker of something, surprise, gratitude, passed through his eyes. He gave me a small, tired smile. It was the most genuine expression I had seen from him all evening. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. He leaned back on his hands. "My little sister, she's a lot like me. Tries to carry everything herself. Doesn't know how to ask for help." He sighed. "I'm supposed to be the one who has it all figured out. The big brother. The anchor." He made a wry face, referencing the gym's name. "Nobody has it all figured out," I offered. "Sometimes the anchor needs an anchor." The words hung in the air between us. It was the most real conversation we'd ever had. We weren't client and trainer. We were just two men, sitting on a mat, talking about the burden of carrying things alone. He didn't say anything else about his sister, and I didn't press. But the mood had shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, shared understanding. When we stood up to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. This time, it wasn't a correction. It was just a touch. "Thanks, Leo," he said, his voice low. His eyes held mine for a long moment. "I appreciate that." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He squeezed my shoulder once, then let go. As I walked away, I felt the warm imprint of his hand long after he had released me. Something had broken through that day. A wall I hadn't even realized he had up had been breached, however briefly. He had let me see the man behind the trainer, the person who also carried tension, who also worried. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, my pathetic, one-sided crush began to feel like something more substantial. It began to feel, impossibly, like hope. The weeks that followed were charged with a new kind of energy. The wall, once breached, never went back up completely. Our sessions were still focused and professional, but they were now threaded with something more personal. The small talk wasn't just small talk anymore. He'd ask about my work and actually listen to the answer. I'd ask about his weekend, and he'd tell me about a hiking trail he'd found or a movie he'd seen. We were mapping the edges of each other's lives, one small, careful detail at a time. My progress in the gym was tangible. I was lifting heavier, moving with more confidence. I was starting to feel solid, my body was changing, but the more profound transformation was internal. The constant hum of invisibility was fading, replaced by the quiet confidence that came from being seen. Julian saw me. He saw my effort, my frustration, my small victories. And his seeing me made me feel real. The tension between us, however, was becoming almost unbearable. It was in the long pauses between his instruction and my execution. It was in the way our eyes would meet and hold for a beat too long in the mirror. It was in the air, thick and electric, whenever he stood close to me. We were orbiting each other, two celestial bodies caught in a gravitational pull, getting closer and closer with every rotation. I felt like a string being pulled tighter and tighter, and I knew that eventually, it would have to snap. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. The gym was quiet, nearing closing time. We were the only ones left in the free weights area. It was the end of our session, and Julian had programmed a personal record attempt for me on the squat. The weight on the bar was more than I had ever attempted. It looked like a mountain. "You can do this," Julian said, his voice steady. He stood behind the rack, his expression serious. "All the work we've done has been for this. Your form is solid. You're strong enough." I stepped under the bar, the familiar weight settling onto my shoulders. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. The numbers on the plates seemed to mock me. Doubt, my old, familiar companion, crept into my mind. My heart started to pound, a frantic, panicked rhythm. "I don't think I can," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I felt that old feeling creeping back in, the fear of being stuck, of failing. Julian moved, his presence suddenly right behind me. He didn't touch me, not yet. "Don't think," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. "Just do. You know the movement. Hips back, chest up, drive." I took a shaky breath and lifted the bar from the rack. I took my 2 steps back. The weight threatened to crush me. I could feel my whole body trembling. My mind was a whirlwind of negativity. "You're going to get hurt. You're going to drop it. You're going to fail. He's going to see you fail." "Leo," his voice cut through the noise in my head. "Look at me." I lifted my eyes to the mirror in front of the rack. His reflection was directly behind mine. His dark eyes were locked on me, intense and unwavering. "You're not alone in this," he said. "I've got you." And then he moved closer. The heat of his body was a solid wall against my back. He placed his hands over mine where they gripped the bar, his fingers lacing through mine, his palms pressing against the backs of my hands. The contact was electric. It shot through my arms, my chest, my entire body. It wasn't a trainer's touch. It was something else entirely. This is it. I am not imagining this. This is real. My thoughts are a jumble, a mess of pure feeling. His breath is warm against my neck, a ghost of a touch that makes every hair on my body stand on end. He smells like soap and sweat and that faint, grounding scent of cedar. It's the most intoxicating thing I have ever smelled. He adjusted my grip slightly, his thumb stroking the back of my hands. Then, he reset the rack behind me, the clang of metal echoing in the quiet gym. He didn't move away. He stayed right there, pressed against me, his hands still covering mine on the bar. His body was a shield, a promise. "Breathe with me," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my bones. Right there. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and I felt his chest expand against my back. Instinctively, I matched him. Inhale. Exhale. My own frantic heartbeat began to slow, syncing with the steady rhythm of his. The panic in my mind receded, pushed back by the overwhelming, undeniable reality of his presence. He was here, with me, holding me. "Forget the weight," he whispered. "Forget the gym. It's just you and me. Just this movement. Inhale on the way down." I inhaled, and together, we began to descend. His body moved with mine, a perfect mirror. His hands on mine were a conduit of strength, of confidence. I felt his power flowing into me, steadying my trembling legs. "Hold," he breathed at the bottom of the squat. "Now drive. Exhale. Push the floor away." I pushed. I drove my heels into the ground and exhaled, and the weight, which had felt impossible moments before, began to move. It was a struggle, a slow, grinding ascent. Every muscle in my body screamed. But Julian was there, a silent, solid presence, his strength a tangible force. I felt him tense with me, pushing with me. We rose together. I locked my knees at the top, the rep complete. I had done it. A wave of exhaustion and exhilaration washed over me. I stood there, panting, the heavy bar still on my shoulders, Julian still pressed against me, our hands still intertwined. The moment stretched, suspended in time. The world outside of this small, charged space had ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, the weight, and the sound of our breathing, perfectly in sync. He was the one who broke the spell. He gently guided me forward, and together we racked the weight. The final, echoing clang of the bars settling into the hooks sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. He slowly, reluctantly, removed his hands from mine. The loss of contact was immediate and sharp. I turned to face him, my heart still hammering in my chest, but for a different reason now. He stood less than a foot away. His face was flushed, his breathing as heavy as mine. His dark eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw everything I had been hoping to see, everything I had been terrified to imagine. The professionalism was gone. The trainer was gone. It was just Julian. And he was looking at me with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just passed between us. It was a confession made not with language, but with breath, with touch, with shared effort. The air between us was thick with unspoken things, with months of observation and yearning and quiet, desperate hope. The overhead lights of the gym seemed to hum with the tension. The silence stretched, pulled taut like a bowstring. I could see the pulse beating in his throat. He took a half step closer, and my breath hitched. This was the tipping point, the moment where everything could change or everything could shatter. "Leo," he said, his voice rough, hoarse. He didn't say anything else. He just said my name, but he packed 1,000 questions into that single word. And I, who had spent a lifetime building walls and hiding in the shadows, finally found the courage to answer. I didn't use words either. I just held his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I let him see everything. The fear, the loneliness, and the overwhelming, terrifying truth of how much I wanted him. He closed the remaining distance between us. The gym was technically still open, the last few employees milling about at the front desk, but in that moment, we were in our own universe. Julian slowly raised a hand, not to correct my form, but to cup the side of my face. His thumb stroked my jaw, a touch so tender it made my knees weak. His callous skin was a rough, warm comfort against mine. "This isn't just about the weights, is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't really a question. It was a statement, a confirmation of the truth that had been humming between us for months. "No," I managed to choke out. "It never was." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a smile of relief, of recognition. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The first kiss wasn't explosive or desperate. It was quiet, searching, and deeply, profoundly right. It was the feeling of a lock finding its key. His lips were soft, warm, and tasted faintly of the mint from his water bottle. It was a kiss that felt like an exhale after holding my breath for a lifetime. It was honest. It wasn't rushed. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had led us to this point. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. His other hand came up to hold the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. We stood there for a long moment, just breathing each other in. The world slowly started to filter back in, the hum of the lights, the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner starting up. "I should lock up," he murmured, his voice thick. He didn't move. "Okay," I whispered back. I didn't move either. He finally pulled away, his hands dropping from my face, and the loss of his touch was a physical ache. The space between us felt cold. The spell was broken, and reality came rushing in with all its awkward, uncertain edges. What now? What were we? We walked to the locker room in a charged, clumsy silence. Every accidental brush of our arms felt like a jolt of electricity. I couldn't look at him. I was too raw, too exposed. I felt as if my chest had been cracked open and my heart was laid bare for him to see. In the empty locker room, the silence was even more profound. I fumbled with my locker, my hands shaking. "Leo," he said from behind me. I turned around. He was leaning against the lockers, his arms crossed, watching me with an unreadable expression. I get off in 10 minutes. It was an offer, a question, a possibility. My mind raced. Go with him. Where? What would we do? What would we say? The fear, my old, insidious friend, began to whisper its poison in my ear. "This is a mistake. He'll regret this. You'll only get hurt." I almost said no. The word was on the tip of my tongue, a shield to protect me from potential pain. But then I remembered the feeling of his hands on mine, the steady rhythm of his breathing against my back, the feeling of being truly, completely seen. It was a feeling worth risking anything for. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll wait for you outside." His shoulders relaxed, a visible release of tension. A small, real smile touched his lips. "Okay," he repeated. The 10 minutes I spent waiting on the bench outside the gym were the longest of my life. The cool night air did little to calm the frantic energy buzzing under my skin. What had I just done? I had kissed my personal trainer in the middle of the gym. I had agreed to. What? I didn't even know. Every car that passed, I was convinced it was him, leaving without me. Every minute that ticked by felt like an eternity, stretching my nerves to their breaking point. Just as I was about to give up, convinced I had imagined the entire encounter, the glass doors opened. Julian emerged, no longer in his staff shirt, but in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He looked different out of uniform, more relaxed, more real. He saw me on the bench and his steps didn't falter. He walked right over and sat down next to me, leaving only a few inches of space between us. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet in the night air. "Hey," I replied. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city a distant backdrop to the roaring in my own ears. I didn't know the protocol for this. What were the rules for the morning after a first kiss that happened at night in a gym? "I'm not sorry," he said suddenly, turning to look at me. His expression was serious, his gaze direct. "About what happened in there. I just want you to know that." A wave of relief, so profound it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. "I'm not sorry either," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. He nodded, seeming satisfied with that. "Good," he blew out a long breath. "Look, Leo, I've wanted to do that for a while now. Longer than I should probably admit." My head snapped up. "You have." He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "Are you kidding me? I practically rearranged my entire schedule a few months ago, just so I'd be on the floor when you usually came in." My mind reeled. All those times I thought I was being a pathetic, obsessive observer, he had been observing me right back. All those glances I had dissected for meaning, they had actually meant something. The current I had felt flowing between us hadn't been one-sided after all. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice full of wonder. "Professionalism," he said with a shrug. "You were a member, then you were my client. There are lines you don't cross. But tonight, I could not cross it. When you were at that rack, and you looked so lost, I had to." He was right. I had been lost, and he had found me. "So what now?" I asked, the question hanging in the cool night air. He turned to me, his knee brushing against mine. The small point of contact was a grounding force. Now, he said, his voice dropping lower, I was thinking we could go get some terrible, greasy diner food. And just talk. If you want terrible, greasy diner food. It was the most perfect suggestion I had ever heard. It was normal. It was real. Yeah, I said, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time. I'd like that a lot. He smiled back, and the sight of it, open and unguarded, made my heart ache in the best possible way. He stood up and held out his hand. I took it without hesitation. His fingers laced through mine, a perfect fit. And as we walked across the parking lot, under the dim glow of the streetlights, I felt the last vestiges of my invisibility fall away. I was here. I was solid. And I was holding his hand. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The next morning, I woke up alone in my own bed, and for a terrifying, gut-wrenching moment, I thought I had dreamed it all. The memory of the kiss, the diner, the easy conversation that had lasted until 2 in the morning, it all felt too good, too perfect to be real. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Panic, that familiar, suffocating blanket, started to descend. He regretted it. It was a mistake. I had misread everything. I scrambled for my phone, my hands trembling. There were no new messages. Of course there weren't. Why would there be? I had been a momentary diversion, a curiosity. I sank back onto my pillows, the sterile silence of my apartment mocking me. The ghost was back. I had been a fool to think a few hours could banish him for good. I dragged myself through my morning routine, the loops reforming around me, tighter than ever. Work was a blur of spreadsheets and meaningless emails. I kept checking my phone, my hope dwindling with every passing hour. By lunchtime, I had resigned myself to the fact that it was over before it had even begun. I would have to find a new gym. I could never face him again. The thought was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. Then, at 3:14 p.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. A text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Julian. Hope your day isn't dragging too much. I was thinking, I'm not training you tonight, but I'll be at the gym anyway. Just, if you're there. I read the message 3 times. It was real. He had texted me. It wasn't an apology or a goodbye. It was an invitation. A tentative, hopeful question mark at the end of a terrible day. If you're there. The knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened, replaced by a fragile, fluttering warmth. The hours until my usual gym time crawled by. I was a wreck of nerves all over again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the fear of the unknown. It was the terror of a known quantity, a hope so bright it was blinding. What would happen? How would we act? The gym was our space, but the context had irrevocably shifted. We weren't just trainer and client anymore. We were something else, and we had to navigate that something else in the bright, public space of our origin story. I walked into Iron and Anchor that evening feeling like an actor on opening night who has forgotten all his lines. My hands were clammy. I saw him immediately. He was talking to another trainer near the front desk, but his eyes were scanning the entrance. When they landed on me, a visible wave of relief washed over his face. He gave me a small, private smile that made my heart stumble. He excused himself and walked over to me. Hey, he said, his voice a low murmur that was just for me. You came. You said to. I replied, my attempt at a casual tone failing miserably. I know, he grinned. Just glad you listened. The air between us was thick with things we couldn't say. The memory of the kiss, of his hand in mine. We were standing in the middle of a crowded gym, surrounded by people, but we were locked in our own private bubble. So, I started, fumbling for something to say. Should I go warm up? Leo, he said, his expression softening. He took a small step closer. We don't have to pretend. It's okay if this is weird. His words were a lifeline. He was acknowledging the awkwardness, giving it a name, and in doing so, he diffused it. Okay. I breathed out, a laugh of pure relief escaping me. Good. Because this is really weird. I know, he said, his smile returning. Go do your workout. I'll be around. And maybe, after, we can get some food that isn't from a greasy spoon. It was a plan. A promise of a future that extended beyond the gym walls. It was all I needed. I nodded, feeling a real, genuine smile spread across my face. Okay, that sounds good. My workout was both the best and worst I'd ever had. I was so energized, so full of a humming, nervous energy that the weights felt lighter than ever. But I was also completely distracted. I was aware of Julian everywhere. I saw him spotting a client across the room, and our eyes met for a fleeting second. I felt his presence as he walked behind the treadmill I was on. Every near interaction was a jolt to my system. This was our new dynamic, a dance of stolen glances and silent acknowledgments in a public space. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. At the end of my workout, I was stretching on a mat, my mind already on the evening ahead, when he came over. He sat down next to me, just as he had done weeks ago when he'd first offered to train me. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Good workout?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It was." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I meant what I said last night, Leo. I'm not sorry. And this isn't just some fleeting thing for me." He looked at me, his gaze serious and unwavering. "I just need you to know that. I'm not playing games." It was the reassurance I hadn't even known I needed so badly. It was the balm on the wound of a lifetime of self-doubt. My internal fear, the voice that told me I wasn't wanted, was finally silenced by the quiet, steady conviction in his voice. "I'm not either," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He reached out, and, right there in the middle of the gym, he took my hand. He didn't lace his fingers through mine. He just laid his hand over mine where it rested on the mat. A simple, solid, grounding touch. A public declaration in a quiet gesture. It was a promise, an anchor. That night, we went to a small Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and flickering candles. We talked for hours, filling in the blank spaces of each other's lives. I told him about my quiet job, my love of old books, my feeling of being adrift. He told me about his loud, chaotic family, his passion for fixing things, his own fears of not living up to the expectations he set for himself. We were just two people, sharing a meal, sharing our stories. It was simple. It was profound. When he walked me to my apartment door, the familiar dread of parting didn't come. He turned to me, his hands finding my waist, pulling me gently closer. "I don't want to say good night," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Then don't," I whispered. I invited him in. My small, quiet apartment, which had so often felt like a lonely cage, suddenly felt like a home. It felt like a place where he belonged. We didn't fall into bed. It was quieter than that, more intimate. We ended up on my lumpy couch, his arm around me, my head resting on his shoulder. He showed me pictures of his sister's ridiculous-looking dog on his phone. I pointed out my favorite books on the shelf. It was a gentle exploration, a quiet settling. Later, as we lay in my bed, the darkness of the room a safe cocoon, he turned to me. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. I thought about the man I was just a few months ago, a ghost haunting the corners of a gym, a man who felt so invisible he was practically transparent. And I thought about the man I was now, lying next to this solid, warm, incredible person who saw him so clearly. "I'm thinking," I said, my voice soft in the darkness, "that I finally feel solid." He laced his fingers through mine, his hand a warm, steady weight in the dark. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "Good," he murmured against my skin. "That's all I've ever wanted." We didn't need any more words. We just lay there, our hands intertwined, our breathing falling into the same steady rhythm. The loops were gone. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of peace. I was no longer braced for anything. I was just here, present, in this moment. I closed my eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back. It felt like I had finally come home.